Greetings again, Ecotopians. Well, it's been a big week if you've been marching your way through the material on our Moodle site. And up till now, we really haven't talked about redwoods, and the course should be all about redwood ecosystems. So here we go. Let's have a quick overview of our central character, the coast redwood. So here it is, the coastal redwoods, known by its Latin taxonomic name as Sequoia sempervirens. The common name, it also goes by the California redwood or the giant redwood, but we will call it the coast redwood. That's what I'm going to call it. And just a note on the taxonomy here, Sequoia sempervirens. Sequoia is a genus. That's a taxonomic level, and it was named in 1847 by this guy, and it's thought that he was maybe honoring a Cherokee scholar named Sequoia. However, he left no written history of his reasoning, and some people thought maybe it's something else, but that's as good as we know. I actually think it's kind of ironic. As you will see when we study the history of interactions between the European colonists and the Native Americans in this part of the world, they've been pretty bad. And to have named the tree here after a Native American, even not a local Native American, I think is a little bit ironic. The last name, sempervirens, means ever living. And so Sequoia sempervirens, there it is. I am kind of picky about something. If I ask you for the name of this tree, the Latin name of this tree, I expect you to spell it correctly, Sequoia sempervirens, and also to capitalize the genus name Sequoia and write sempervirens in lowercase and to either underline or italicize exactly as I have done here. That is important. That is what educated people do with taxonomic names, and it bugs me when they don't. So make sure you remember to do that. Okay, back to the tree itself. It is the tallest organism on the planet. The record holder is a tree named Hyperion, discovered by Atkins and Taylor and measured by our own HSU professor Stephen Sillett at 379 feet and change. So that's pretty tall. What's that, 30 stories? Something like that? Maybe 37 stories tall? That's a big skyscraper. And if you're into that kind of thing, records of trees, the biggest, the tallest, the oldest, I've got a link down here for you. Monumental trees, all over the world, all different species. Anyway, Hyperion, you can't find it because they won't tell you where it is, which I think is a good thing, because if everyone knew, they might flock to it and harm it. So that's pretty big. Okay, so what are redwood trees? Well, they are a plant. You're probably not surprised, but I'm just going to lead you through basically 2 weeks worth of Botany 105 in this one slide. And if I say it's a plant, it's just to distinguish it from other organisms that are not plants, such as animals or fungi or bacteria or protists. It makes seeds. Not like mosses or ferns. So some plants don't make seeds, but redwoods do. They make wood. You might not be surprised to know that redwoods are trees. So they're vascular plants that make wood. They do not make flowers like a flowering plant does. Many of the plants you see outside have flowers, including grasses, but not this group of organisms. They make cones, so they are known as conifers. That's what conifer means. It means a cone-bearing plant. In parentheses means that you don't have to know this, but I just wanted to say that within the conifers, redwoods are in the cypress family, not the pine family, not the yew family, not the podocarps. There's a number of different coniferous families, and I just wanted to mention that. These are not pine trees. That's why I wanted to say this, because many people who haven't studied botany think that all conifers, all evergreen plants are just pine trees. Well, they're not. Pines are a very narrow group of conifers, and redwoods are not pines, just so you know. Okay, so this is a joke. In a nutshell, haha, that's my pun, redwoods are non-flowering, seed-bearing, coniferous trees. And in this course, when I give you a lot of information and then I summarize it like this with underlining, it means those are probably the words I want you to remember, and those are the ones that might show up on tests. Hint, hint. Okay, coast redwoods have two close relatives, the dawn redwood and the giant sequoia. These are beautiful, gorgeous, fantastic trees. Each one should have a whole course after it. Briefly, I'm just going to say the dawn redwood here, it's all brownish red here because it's actually losing its leaves. It's deciduous. So here's a conifer that is not evergreen. It is deciduous, and it's a close relative of the redwoods. There's a fascinating story about this thing. It was known only as a fossil and thought to be long extinct until someone found it growing in a monastery in China, and they thought, oh my God, it's alive, a living fossil. And it's been spread all over the world now, and they're growing here at HSU up by Science A if you want to see them. Gorgeous bark, really gorgeous bark, and the needles themselves are beautiful whenever they're on the tree. As they start falling off and fall, they just this picture does no justice. It's just a gorgeous color. And then hopefully you know that the giant sequoia that lives up there in the high Sierras is the world's largest tree by volume of wood. So they're enormous, huge trees, beautiful in their own right, a close relative of the coast redwood. I'm going to admit that I made a mistake. If you go all the way back to the very first slide here, I said the coastal redwoods are also known as the giant redwoods. They're not. They're only known as California redwoods. They're not the giant redwoods. The giant redwoods are this other species. Sorry about that. Okay, moving right along. Coast redwoods have leaves. I say this because you might call them needles, which you can if you really want to, but you really shouldn't. I think needles are specifically related to pine trees. Anyway, here's a close-up. You can see that these are the photosynthetic units of redwoods, and they're kind of flattened and paired. And if you're a botanist, you could say a lot more about them. I will simply say this, that they, like many other conifers, are adapted to conserve moisture. They have this orange layer on the outside, which is thick and it's waxy, and that prevents water loss from these leaves. The other thing I wanted to say about redwood leaves is that when you see them close to the ground, they look like this, but if you were to climb way up to the tippy top of a coast redwood, you'd see them looking kind of like this. And they sort of lose their flattened shape and become smaller and pointier, and they cling more closely to the stem. It's thought that this is an adaptation, a further adaptation to conserve water where it's needed to be conserved the most in the tree. These very tall trees have difficulty getting water to the top, and so the cells therein tend to be water stressed, and so they respond by producing a slightly different kind of a leaf, which is pretty cool. Well, coast redwoods reproduce sexually via seeds in cones and also asexually. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about sexual reproduction. You might think that the world's tallest and largest trees would have mighty big cones, but you would be wrong. They don't. They have these teeny tiny little cones. What's up with that? What are they, on steroids or something? I have no idea. All I know is that this is the shape and size of the cone of the coast redwood. Teeny tiny little things, but they make tons of them, and they produce lots and lots of seeds. A coast redwood can produce up to, a single coast redwood can produce up to 100,000 seeds per year. And the darn thing can live for a couple thousand years. So a couple thousand times 100,000, that's a heck of a lot of seeds produced in the lifetime of a single tree. So clearly not all these seeds make it. It's just a really fascinating strategy to produce so many reproductive propagules with such a tiny chance that any of them will ever grow up again. But that's what they do. So when you walk underneath a redwood, you don't have to worry about getting hit in the head by something that looks like this big thing. Imagine if that fell 300 feet through the air and landed on you or your car or something like that. Ouch. Well, you don't have to worry about that. Okay. So that's their sexual reproduction. Very briefly, they also frequently reproduce asexually by a cloning sort of process. And here's one that you see frequently is you'll have a stump, and well, you might not even see the stump, but you see a circle of trees. And what happens is that the first tree sprouts from its base and puts out, they're not babies, they're clones. So all these trees are identical, and sometimes the stump will rot away entirely, leaving only this circle of trees, and you'll think, oh, what a cute little family of trees. If it's a family, it's a very closely related family. Every single individual is genetically identical to the other, and this has a lot of fascinating consequences. For instance, if you were a farmer trying to clear the land, it'd be hard. You'd cut the tree down and it would sprout back trees. So you'd cut them down and they'd sprout back trees, and you'd fight and fight and fight, and it would be hard to clear. For a forester, it's great. You just cut the tree down and they sprout right back. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to plant new trees. However, these trees are pretty darn crowded together, and they will kind of compete for light and maybe not grow so well as if you'd thinned them out. So a forester might come back, and after these have sprouted, they might cut some back, harvest them perhaps or not, to allow the other ones to grow up big and strong. Also, I think genetically, when we say the oldest redwood tree might be a couple thousand years old, well, that's the stem itself that has been, someone put a core through it and counted the rings, but it may have descended from another tree. So it's possible that that genetic individual is much older than the particular trunk that you're looking at, which has implications for the age of these old trees. Another way these guys can reproduce is they produce these grotesque swellings called burls. And if you take a piece of these and put it in water, it'll sprout. So I suppose if this thing fell down, if the tree fell down and the burl got buried, it would sprout and it would continue the tree. This has just recently gotten in the news because some illegal thieves have gone into our national parks, and they cut those burls out because they make really gorgeous furniture and all kinds of wooden applications, and so they're very valuable, so you can make money from these things. And since there aren't very many old redwood trees left anymore, the value of the burls is very high, and so since there's almost no old redwoods off the national parks, the thieves go into the national parks, your and my national parks, and steal them. So I have got a bunch of oh, I know, on our news forum in Moodle, I have a bunch of links to recent news articles about this. Really kind of sad. It turns out that the ranger, I don't know if this is the park ranger or not, but if she is, she went out and found she was able to match burls at a local burl dealer to this tree, and was able to confiscate the wood, which is kind of a shame for the person who's trying to sell the burl. I'd rather kind of catch the person who did it to begin with, but anyway. Burl thievery, who knew? Okay, let's talk a little bit more about redwood, the quality of redwoods. It's very resistant to fire, rot, and attack by parasites. Why is that? Well, first of all, it has an extremely thick and fire-resistant bark. The bark of redwoods can be up to a foot thick. And so when the fires come, they tend to burn around the trees but not climb up into the trees. So especially if the trees have lost their lower limbs, which redwoods usually do, it's hard for the fire to get up into the crown and kill the tree. It usually burns around it. Second of all, the wood itself doesn't have much flammable resin. There's a lack of flammable resins in the wood, and that makes it a poor firewood. So on the one hand, no, burning redwood in your stove, you can do it. It's not nearly as good as other kinds of wood. And in nature, the trees it's kind of resistant to catching on fire because it doesn't have the kind of resins that other kinds of woods do have. So even if the fire gets through the bark, it hits the wood, it's not happy. So that's fire, but what about fungi and insects? Well, redwood and the bark and the wood, have an unusually high level of tannins. and that makes it unpalatable to fungi and insects. So the living trees themselves are not prone to attack by parasites. That also makes the wood beautiful because it's so stained so darkly red by the tannins, and it makes lumber made from the wood very resistant and long-lived. And so was and still is a very sought-after wood for many applications, including decking and siding, because it's so resistant, or use in the tropics where there's termite problems. The termites just don't like the tannins in redwoods, and so it's very resistant to that kind of stuff. So, because they're resistant to fire, rot, and attack by parasites, redwoods can reach a great age. And as I've mentioned, they can get to be a couple thousand years old. The oldest known is over 2,200 years old. Not the oldest tree on the planet, not nearly the oldest organism on the planet, but pretty darn old. I wanted to say something about the fossil record of redwoods. I find it fascinating and mysterious. And here's the deal. Fossils identical to living redwoods are tens of millions of years old. So these guys have been around for millions and millions of years, a long time. And the former range of redwoods extends throughout the northern hemisphere, all around the northern hemisphere, North America, Europe, and Asia. Well, now its range is really contracted. Today, coast redwoods are only found along a narrow coastal strip from Big Sur, south of San Francisco, to just to the over the border in southern Oregon. I'll show you a map in a second. So, why is that? In parentheses, because it's really fairly speculative. My best understanding from the paleobotanists is that in the millions of years when redwoods were widespread throughout the northern hemisphere, the global climate was much warmer and wetter than it is now, and than it has been since the Pleistocene 10 or 40,000 years ago. So I guess the planet has cooled off an awful lot and dried out, and that has been bad for redwoods. Makes you wonder what's going to happen with global warming if the whole world climate gets warmer and wetter again. Will the redwood range expand? That is so speculative. I certainly would not bank on it. But in any case, I just wanted to point out this fascinating range contraction. You can go to Montana, you can go to British Columbia, you can go to China, and you can find fossils of redwoods, but they're not here, not there anymore. Let's take a look at the range. On this map from the Save the Redwoods League shows in green that the current range of redwoods goes from, this is Big Sur, south of Monterey, south of San Francisco, right along the coast, all the way north, right past us in Eureka, and for some reason they decided to omit southern Oregon, but just where Brookings is the last and the most northerly redwood, and it doesn't go inland at all, or not very far. That is a narrow distribution of a plant. In red are the remaining old growth. I guess I'm not quite sure how they categorize old growth. That's a subject we'll talk more about later on in the course. But you can see that the in red old growth redwood is very much smaller than the green. The redwoods are still here. They're just resprouted from the old trees that have been harvested, that have been logged. And that is really important to know. And again, we'll come back to that. We are really lucky because we live near some of the biggest parks that protect the last remnants of ancient redwoods, and you can just go and visit them, and you will visit them in this course. But I wanted to just finish off this lecture with just mentioning redwood ecology. We will talk about the climate, fire regime, water relations, and the relationships of redwoods to other species in this course. Now is not the time to do it, but we will be talking about them in the coming weeks. And it's all very fascinating stuff, and I hope you learn a lot about it. Also, we'll be talking about the interaction of humans and redwoods from the logging days, one of our first, at least after colonization, we'll call it. We came and we started logging, and that was a huge interaction, a huge change to redwood ecosystems, and we'll talk about that and how much timber was produced and why it's not being produced so much anymore. To the use of redwoods for recreational purposes, to preserving redwoods. This is Julia Butterfly Hill, who got famous for camping out in a tree and preventing it from being cut down. She was up there for a long time, I think. And then using redwoods to study, or to study redwoods for scientific purposes. We came in and we cut down a lot of redwoods without really understanding much about them. Our understanding of them continues to grow. Here's Steve Sollett up in a tree with his wife Marie Antoine, and they climb these trees and they study, and they have just found the most amazing things about redwoods by going up there and studying what's there. So we'll talk more about that too. Okay, that concludes this show, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you look forward to learning much more about redwoods in the coming weeks. Sayonara.